Welcome, heroes and villains, to the Fjuke Enterprises YouTube channel. I am the teacher of Fjuke, and there are so many games out there that Fjuke doesn't know about, so figured that I would interview people who love systems and what makes those systems stand out against other systems. Everyone knows about Dungeons and Dragons, but there are other ancient games that have fans out there, so why not start with one of the oldest tabletop role-playing games that isn't Dungeons and Dragons, that TSR got in trouble with in the early 80s. The people that made Dungeons and Dragons. With all that preamble out of the way, let's learn about Call of Cthulhu. My guest today is Keeper Jason, who runs a Call of Cthulhu game on Mondays. Would you like to introduce yourself any further?
Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Jason. I am very much into the keeping scene of Call of Cthulhu. It's my favorite game to run, but also I've run it at various conventions and tournaments, such as the Cthulhu Masters at the UK Games Expo, many a time. I'm a moderator on quite a big Call of Cthulhu server where we run a lot of different games on there. I also write for Call of Cthulhu, so I've done a couple of projects with Chaosium. But also I enjoy the horror genre the most in terms of my writing in general. So it's always good fun to write that sort of stuff, whether it's Cthulhu or if it's anything branching out from that. And of course, as you said, I run a Master Nylato type game on Mondays. It just so happens.
How would you, in your own words, describe Call of Cthulhu?
That is actually quite difficult because it took me a long time to get into the RPG for that reason. But yeah, if you're kind of putting aside the actual short story Call of Cthulhu, all of the kind of pop art, chibi Cthulhu stuff that you see, like coffee cups and things. The actual RPG, if you imagine almost like a murder mystery, perhaps something like Hercule Poirot, Murder on the Orient Express, that sort of thing, 1920s, 1930s. But as well as a possible murder, maybe, there's also the possibility of a cosmic horror or unfurling the mysteries of cosmic horror, which we as human beings don't really know much about. We're actually quite oblivious to it. So it's this whole concept of very slowly going down the rabbit hole and just starting to uncover things that we as humans do not comprehend or understand. But the more that happens, the more you realize. And it's very much like that saying, the more we know, the less we understand, which is one reason why I like it so much.
There are super generic games that are just basically building blocks for anything, such as GURPS, and more specific games like Star Wars Edge of the Empire. Where does Call of Cthulhu fit into that scale?
Well, given it's pretty much an identical what's the word? Oh, sorry, I'll start again. Given it's very much based on the basic role-playing system BRP, although previously or the very first edition, I suppose, would be more based around RuneQuest and Glorantha and all that stuff, which is still published on Chaosium. Call of Cthulhu is still very much akin to that. There's not really much of a deviation, so I think it would be pretty much bang in the middle. Call of Cthulhu is more like there's a lot of different settings for Call of Cthulhu. So again, you've got 1920s, but then you've got things like Invictus in Roman times. You've got Dark Ages, Gaslight for Victorian era, Pulp, so some more 1930s usually, although Pulp can technically run with anything. Modern. Some people have even run far future sort of Cthulhu and things like that. But yeah, in terms of the actual mechanics, it is still designed in a system that's supposed to be fairly customizable and adaptable. So therefore, yeah, it's more kind of in the middle. It's not so incredibly specific like Edge of the Empire that it's adapted to that one thing, but also it's not so open like GURPS or maybe even Fate a little bit. I hope that made sense. I appreciate that was a little bit of a ramble.
I just realized I forgot to add this question to the list, but
It's okay.
Dungeons and Dragons is a D20 system. Is the same true for Call of Cthulhu?
No. So basic role playing is very much based on the percentile system. So again, whether you're playing RuneQuest or Call of Cthulhu, it's the same mechanics. If you've played the old Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, it's a little bit like that in like the most basic sorts of roles that you can do. So it's very much you roll a D100, and or it could be a 2d10s, and you choose 10s and units, and you roll underneath your skill or underneath your attribute, and the lower you get, the better the results. So on a 1, that's a critical or critical hit, if you want to call it that. Usually, if it's 100, sometimes it's a little bit lower, depending on how good you are at that skill, but that will be a fumble, so things can go terribly wrong should you roll that.
How hard is what makes Call of Cthulhu stand out from all the other games out there?
I mean, I'm very, very biased towards Call of Cthulhu, so I think there's a lot of reasons. But I think the main thing, I mean, Call of Cthulhu at the moment is pretty much the second most popular role-playing system on Roll20, certainly. In places like Japan, it is by far the most popular system, way surpassing D&D. I think it is that amalgamation of, you've got, rather than kind of very high fantasy, quite action-orientated play, and obviously, D&D can be more role-playing as well. It's a bit less crunchy. There are some crunchy aspects to Call of Cthulhu, but it's overall less crunchy, so it might be a bit easier to get into. But also, it's that mix of things, like you've got your investigation side, so it tends to be a bit more slow pace, more mystery, more clues, unraveling story, and so on, with this horror element in there, which is quite an interesting mix. You don't really get it in that many systems in general. The only one I can really think of that maybe similar-ish, I guess, would be Dresden Files, but even then, Dresden Files is normally sort of more modern. Play characters are more powerful overall. I think with Call of Cthulhu, and I know you're going to ask me this a bit later, but with Call of Cthulhu, your characters are quite renowned to be not very powerful, and therefore, potentially helpless against the horrors that could befall you.
How hard is it to improve your characters in Call of Cthulhu?
It kind of depends on the length of your campaign or what have you. There are certain mechanics, such as there is an improvement phase, which I guess would be the same as leveling up in D&D. So after a certain point, say, and I guess you do have discretion as a keeper for this. It could be after a few sessions. It could be if you're running, say, a published campaign, it will tell you, like, after a chapter or so on, to do an improvement phase. So there you can do things like you can improve your skills if you succeeded on those skills during the game. A few other things as well that you can do, such as you can regain sanity points back potentially. Say if you go and get help, either yourself or seek external help and things like that. Just as some examples. After each session, though, regardless, you get an improvement roll for what's called your luck score. So you do at least get a little bit of luck back. Luck is very, very useful. It is technically a house rule, but I've not seen any game that doesn't use luck. I really like it as a mechanic. It basically, without going too much into it, it basically allows you to pass rolls a little easier, but you have to spend your luck in order to do so. There are also such things as luck rolls. So there is that balance of, you don't want to spend too much of your luck just in case you have to do a luck roll. And of course, the lower your luck score goes, the harder it is then to pass a roll, and you get more unlucky as a person, which can also cause problems.
There are games where it's extremely easy to die, even in character generation. Is death or insanity easy in Call of Cthulhu?
Well, I think there's still a bit of this this slight misconception, or maybe an exaggeration, that in Call of Cthulhu, it's really easy to die. You can go mad, and I think that can put people off sometimes because they want to feel like they're a hero. Like I mentioned earlier, yes, as an investigator, you are not as powerful as, say, a hero in D&D or anything like that. Having said that, though, there are a better way to reframe it is that it's much more grounded in real life, to the best of the best way I can put it. Obviously, there's the Cthulhu mythos, and obviously there's horrors and all this stuff, which is blatantly impossible. But apart from that, it's very much grounded in real life and historical events. So say if you're in the 1920s, you're going to be a fairly bog standard human being. So in terms of combating these forces, what you're really doing, rather than killing them outright, is you're pushing them back that day. You live to tell the tale. They are pushed back into the darkness for another day. However, it doesn't always mean that you're going to go mad fairly quickly. Sometimes, and I've seen this myself with players, people can be very, very lucky in that they don't lose sanity or they don't die. Other times, though, that can happen. To a degree, it can depend on what the players do. You can certainly, as a keeper, do the whole "are you sure" sort of method, or maybe encourage them to think a bit more about a decision they're going to make. However, if they do something reckless, there's going to be consequences. And one thing I think which is difficult sometimes if you're more into D&D as a player and then maybe play a Call of Cthulhu game, you're not going to get out of things or solve problems by shooting things, blowing things up, setting things on fire. Rarely, maybe with Call of Cthulhu, but again, think more about it. If you're in real life, are you really going to succeed by doing those things? The answer is probably not. There's no shame in running away from things, certainly. But also, I mentioned Pulp Cthulhu, in that you can use that with any setting you want with Call of Cthulhu. If you want something a bit more action orientated, where your heroes are more heroic, there is Pulp Cthulhu. So you get more things like talents. Your abilities are generally better. Having said that, NPCs are also more powerful on the whole. But it's way more tricky to actually die and go mad as a pulp character. So there is that kind of middle ground as well. If you want something maybe a little bit more like D&D, but you're still within the Cthulhu universe, as you were.
As the penultimate question, do you have a story from a Call of Cthulhu game that you would like to share today?
Oh, yeah, many stories. I was racking my brains about this because I didn't want to give away any spoilers, especially for those of you who watch our Monday game on Parageeks 2. Excuse me. I think one of them, I was running a published scenario called Mr. Corbett, which is a fairly classic Call of Cthulhu scenario, but they've kind of rejigged it for the new edition, 7th edition. There's this great point which I really wanted to milk, in general, if you want your players to feel uncomfortable, obviously consensually so, one thing you can do is make an NPC do something that makes the players feel out of control. And one of those things is have an NPC turn up out of the blue, obviously within reason, but things like that. Get them to go to a safe place that they think is safe. With Mr. Corbett, there's a character who is basically an old spinster. She very much likes younger men, especially if they're of an attractive appearance. However, she knows a lot of information. She knows everything about everyone and gossips a lot. So she's actually quite useful, but you've got to kind of get her on your side. So I was doing things like getting her to turn up at the player's house, insisting that they do something for her in return, like have her cake. She brought around a cake and so on, water her plants for her and things like that, and being just a little bit too kind of imposing. And it made them feel uncomfortable, but in a good way. And I think that was a really nice sort of chemistry and role-playing set of scenes for the players to do. I think we all enjoyed doing that.
So, as the question I end all my interviews with, do you have anything you want to shout out this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of my own writing, a lot of my stuff is actually awaiting publication, so I haven't got anything to shout out about that as of yet. I can't really reveal anything. However, in terms of other stuff I do, I'm also one half of the Complus RPG convention for charity. We are doing our next convention, Complus 4, in November, and you can go to complus.live to check out our website and all the stuff that we do for the Butterfly Project and the Chrysalis School in Uganda. So feel free to take a look at that. And also, I might give this to Fajook, but I'm gonna share a link to our Call of Cthulhu server. Whether you're completely new to Call of Cthulhu or if you're a veteran, it doesn't matter. Feel free to come and join us. We're a very safe space. We're hopefully coming across as a very nice group of people. So come and join us.
Thank you to all my watchers who have made it to the end of the video. Thank you, Jason, for joining me, and I hope you all have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.